Racist grandma opens door to black twins, then discovers shocking truth that changes everything. Margaret Thornton had lived a life marked by both privilege and pain. At 78, she was a respected pillar of her small southern community, known for her charm, grace, and the sprawling antebellum mansion she called home. The Thornton estate had been in her family for generations, a symbol of their long-standing wealth and influence. Born in 1946, Margaret had grown up during a time of significant social change. But her world had remained largely insulated from the civil rights movement that reshaped America. Her parents, staunch traditionalists, had raised her with values that now seemed outdated and, in many ways, problematic. Margaret had married young to Thomas Thornton, a man from a similarly prestigious family. Their union had been one of social convenience rather than love, a fact that became painfully clear as the years passed. They had never been blessed with children, a source of deep sorrow for Margaret, and disappointment for Thomas. Thomas had passed away 5 years ago, leaving Margaret alone in the big house with only her memories and regrets for company. She filled her days with gardening, book club meetings, and charity work, trying to ignore the growing sense of emptiness that seemed to echo through the halls of her ancestral home. Despite her genteel exterior, Margaret harbored a secret that had gnawed at her conscience for decades. In her youth, she had made a decision, one born of fear, prejudice, and societal pressure, that had altered the course of not just her life, but the lives of others. It was a choice she had buried deep, never speaking of it to anyone, not even Thomas. As she aged, Margaret found herself increasingly haunted by the past. She would wake in the night, her dreams filled with faces she had tried so hard to forget. During the day, she would catch herself staring at old photographs, wondering about the paths not taken and the lives that might have been. Margaret's neighbors and friends saw only a kind, if somewhat lonely, elderly woman. They had no idea of the turmoil that lay beneath her carefully maintained facade. Little did they know that Margaret's world was about to be turned upside down by an unexpected visit, one that would force her to confront the choices of her past and potentially reshape her understanding of family, love, and redemption. As the summer sun began to set on another quiet day in Margaret's life, she had no idea that the knock on her door was about to shatter the carefully constructed reality she had lived in for so long. The truth, long buried but never forgotten, was about to come to light in a way she could never have anticipated. The day that would change everything started like any other for Margaret Thornton. She had spent the morning tending to her prized rose garden, the afternoon at her weekly bridge club meeting, and was now settling in for a quiet evening with a well-worn copy of Gone with the Wind, a nostalgic reminder of a world she understood. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7, an unexpected sound broke the evening stillness, a tentative knock at the front door. Margaret frowned, setting aside her book. She wasn't expecting visitors, and it was unusual for anyone to call unannounced, especially at this hour. Making her way to the door, Margaret smoothed her silver hair and straightened her cardigan, ever mindful of presenting a proper appearance. She opened the door, prepared to greet a neighbor in need, or perhaps a lost traveler seeking directions. What she saw instead made her breath catch in her throat. Standing on her porch were 2 children, a boy and a girl, no more than 10 years old. They were clearly twins, with matching wide brown eyes and a smattering of freckles across their noses. But it was their deep, ebony skin that caused Margaret's heart to race, a stark contrast against the white of her door frame. "Can I help you?" Margaret managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The little girl stepped forward, her chin held high despite the nervousness evident in her eyes. "Are you Mrs. Margaret Thornton?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. Margaret nodded, unable to find her voice. "We're Zoe and Zachary Johnson," the girl continued. "And we think you might be our grandmother." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Margaret gripped the doorframe for support. Memories she had long suppressed came rushing back. A young woman's fearful decision, a baby given away, a secret kept for half a century. I don't understand," Margaret stammered, even as a part of her recognized the truth in the children's faces. There was something familiar in the set of their jaws, the curve of their cheeks, features she saw every day in her own mirror. The boy Zachary spoke up then, his voice softer than his sister's, but no less determined. "Our mom, she told us before she died. She said her real mom was a white lady named Margaret Thornton who lived in a big house in Georgia. She said you gave her up because she was mixed." Margaret felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Her legs trembled, and she found herself sinking to her knees, eye level with the children who were claiming a connection she had never dared to acknowledge. "Your mother," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What was her name?" "Amelia," Zoe answered. "Amelia Johnson, but she said you named her Grace before you gave her away." Grace. The name hit Margaret like a physical blow. She had chosen it herself, whispering it to the tiny bundle in her arms before handing her over to the adoption agency. It was the only gift she could give her daughter, a name that carried all the love and hope she couldn't provide. As Margaret struggled to process this shocking turn of events, she became aware of other details. The children's clothes, while clean, were worn and ill-fitting. There was a wariness in their young eyes that spoke of hardship and loss. And behind them, at the end of the driveway, stood a middle-aged black woman watching the scene unfold with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Who's that with you?" Margaret asked, gesturing weakly towards the woman. "That's Miss Patrice," Zachary explained. "She's our social worker. Mom died last month, and Miss Patrice has been trying to help us find family. When she found out about you, she brought us here." The full weight of the situation began to settle on Margaret's shoulders. These children, her grandchildren, were orphans. They had traveled who knows how far on the slim hope that the grandmother they had never known would acknowledge them, would welcome them. As Margaret looked into their hopeful, anxious faces, she realized that this moment would define the rest of her life. The choice she made now would either perpetuate the sins of her past or open the door to a future she had never dared to imagine. With trembling hands, Margaret reached out to the twins. "Please," she said, her voice cracking with emotion, "please come inside. We have a lot to talk about." As Zoe and Zachary stepped over the threshold, Margaret felt the foundations of her world shift. The carefully maintained facade of her life was crumbling, but in its place, something new and unexpected was taking root. Little did Margaret know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about family, love, and redemption. As Margaret ushered the twins into her living room, her mind was reeling. The social worker, Miss Patrice, followed close behind, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of emotions that swirled around them. Margaret gestured for everyone to sit, her southern hospitality kicking in on autopilot even as her world turned upside down. I need to understand," Margaret began, her voice trembling. "How did you find me, and why now, after all these years?" Miss Patrice leaned forward, her kind eyes meeting Margaret's. "Mrs. Thornton, Amelia, Grace, as you knew her. She left a letter for the twins before she passed. In it, she explained everything she knew about her birth mother. It wasn't much, but it was enough for us to start searching." As Miss Patrice spoke, Margaret's gaze was drawn to the twins. They sat close together on her antique sofa, their small hands intertwined, a unit against the world. She saw in them echoes of herself, of the man she had loved so briefly and passionately all those years ago. "Your daughter," Miss Patrice continued. She wanted her children to know their history, all of it. She hoped that maybe, just maybe, they could find a connection to their roots. Margaret closed her eyes, memories washing over her. She was 18 again, young and in love with James, the son of her family's groundskeeper. Their relationship had been a secret, forbidden by the social norms of the time. When she discovered she was pregnant, her parents had been furious. They had sent her away, arranged for the baby to be adopted, and sworn everyone to secrecy. "I never knew," Margaret whispered, opening her eyes to look at the twins. "I never knew what happened to her, to Grace, to Amelia. I wasn't allowed to know." Zoe, her eyes shining with unshed tears, spoke up. "Mom told us she had a good life. She said she was adopted by a loving family, but she always wondered about you. She wanted us to know where we came from." As the truth of the situation sank in, Margaret felt a lifetime of guilt and regret crashing down upon her. She had spent decades trying to forget, to move on, But here was living proof of the life she had given up, the love she had denied. "There's more," Zachary said softly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a faded photograph and handed it to Margaret with trembling fingers. Margaret gasped as she looked at the image. It was a picture of a beautiful young woman with caramel skin and eyes that mirrored her own. Next to her stood a man with a kind smile, and between them were two toddlers, Zoe and Zachary. "That's our mom and dad," Zoe explained. "Mom always kept this picture with her. She said it was important to remember where we came from, but also to celebrate the family we became." As Margaret stared at the photograph, she felt something shift inside her. The woman in the picture, her daughter, had grown up loved. She had created a family of her own, a family that now sat before Margaret, offering a chance at connection she never thought possible. Tears began to flow freely down Margaret's cheeks as the full weight of the revelation hit her. She had a daughter she never knew, grandchildren she never expected, and a chance to right the wrongs of her past. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, looking up at the twins. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here now." As Zoe and Zachary nodded, their own eyes filling with tears, Margaret realized that this discovery was just the beginning. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and painful truths. But for the first time in decades, Margaret felt a glimmer of hope for the future. A future that included the family she had long ago given up. In the days following the twins' arrival, Margaret's life underwent a seismic shift. The decision to welcome Zoe and Zachary into her home and heart was not an easy one, but it was a choice she made with unwavering determination. As she signed the temporary guardianship papers Miss Patrice had brought, Margaret knew she was embarking on a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about family, love, and her own capacity for change. The consequences of her decision rippled out almost immediately. The first hurdle came in the form of her bridge club, a group of women she had considered friends for decades. When Margaret announced that she would be caring for her recently discovered mixed-race grandchildren, the room fell into a shocked silence. "Margaret, dear," Eugenia, the club's president, finally spoke, her voice dripping with false concern. "Have you really thought this through? It's not too late to call social services. Surely there are more suitable arrangements that could be made." The old Margaret might have faltered under the thinly veiled racism and judgment. But as she thought of Zoe and Zachary waiting for her at home, she found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "These children are my flesh and blood," Margaret replied, her voice steady and clear. "They are Thorntons, and they belong with me. If anyone has a problem with that, well, I suppose I'll have to find a new bridge club." With that, she gathered her things and walked out, leaving behind a group of stunned women and decades of conformity. The next challenge came from within her own home. The sprawling mansion, once a source of pride, now felt like a museum of outdated values and painful memories. Margaret found herself seeing her surroundings through the twins' eyes. The old paintings of stern-faced ancestors, the antique furniture that was beautiful but unwelcoming, the separate quarters that had once housed the family's servants. One afternoon, she overheard Zoe whispering to her brother, "Do you think Grandma wishes we were white? Everything here is so not us." The words struck Margaret like a physical blow. That night, after the children had gone to bed, she sat in her study and made a decision. The next morning, she called a local interior designer. "I want to redecorate," she told the surprised woman. "The whole house. I want it to be warm, welcoming, and reflect our family's diversity." The project became a family affair. Margaret involved Zoe and Zachary in every decision, from paint colors to furniture choices. Together, they transformed the cold, formal rooms into spaces filled with color, comfort, and love. Photos of Amelia and her husband joined the portraits of Margaret's ancestors on the walls, a visual representation of the family's expanded history. As the house changed, so did Margaret. She found herself questioning beliefs she had held for a lifetime. She enrolled in diversity education classes at the local community center, joined a support group for transracial families, and began the painful but necessary process of confronting her own ingrained biases. The journey was not without its setbacks. There were nights when Margaret lay awake, overwhelmed by doubt and fear. Was she too old to raise children? Could she ever truly understand and support their experiences as biracial individuals? What would happen if she failed them, as she had failed their mother? But for every moment of doubt, there were countless others filled with joy and discovery. She learned to cornrow Zoe's hair, cheered at Zachary's soccer games, and found herself laughing more than she had in years as the twins filled the house with their energy and humor. The most profound consequence of Margaret's decision came in her relationship with the community. Many of her old friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the change in her circumstances. But in their place, Margaret found a new circle of support. The parents of the twins' schoolmates, a diverse group she might never have interacted with before, became allies and friends. The local black church, which she had only ever driven past, welcomed her with open arms when she nervously attended a service with the children. 6 months after the twins' arrival, Margaret stood in her garden, watching as Zoe and Zachary played with a group of neighborhood children. The sound of their laughter floated on the warm summer air, a melody that filled her heart with a peace she had never known. Miss Patrice, who had stopped by for a routine check-in, stood beside her. "You've done a remarkable thing, Mrs. Thornton," she said softly. "Not many people would have opened their hearts and homes the way you have." Margaret shook her head, her eyes never leaving the children. "I'm not remarkable," she replied. "I'm just trying to make up for lost time, and in the process, I've gained more than I ever thought possible." As she spoke those words, Margaret realized the full truth of them. In choosing to embrace Zoe and Zachary, she had not only changed their lives, but had also given herself a second chance at family, at love, and at leaving a legacy she could be proud of. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more painful conversations about the past, more moments of doubt. But as Margaret watched her grandchildren play, their brown skin glowing in the Georgia sun, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right decision. The consequences of that choice were reshaping her world in ways she never could have imagined, and she was grateful for every moment of it. As Margaret, Zoe, and Zachary settled into their new life together, a secondary plot began to unfold, centered around the twins' deceased mother, Amelia. It started with a simple question from Zachary one evening as Margaret tucked him into bed. "Grandma," he asked, his voice small in the dimly lit room, "do you have any pictures of our mom when she was little?" The question caught Margaret off guard. I'm not sure, sweetheart," she replied, her heart aching. "I never got to see your mom grow up, remember?" But the question lingered in Margaret's mind long after the children had fallen asleep. The next day, she found herself in the attic, rummaging through old boxes she hadn't touched in years. To her surprise and delight, she discovered a small, dusty photo album tucked away in a corner. With trembling hands, Margaret opened the album. There, on the very first page, was a picture she had almost forgotten existed. A newborn baby, her skin a beautiful caramel color, sleeping peacefully in a hospital bassinet. On the back, in Margaret's own youthful handwriting, was scrawled Grace, 1968. Overwhelmed with emotion, Margaret brought the album downstairs to share with the twins. As they pored over the few precious photos of their mother as a newborn, a spark of an idea began to form in Margaret's mind. "What if," she suggested hesitantly, "we try to find out more about your mom's life? About the family that adopted her?" The twins' enthusiastic response set in motion a journey that would become a secondary plotline running parallel to their own story of adaptation and growth. Margaret reached out to the adoption agency, but many of the records from that time had been sealed or lost. Undeterred, she hired a private investigator to help piece together Amelia's history. As weeks turned into months, fragments of Amelia's life began to emerge. They discovered that she had been adopted by a loving couple, the Johnsons, who had raised her in a small town just a few hours away. Amelia had excelled in school, particularly in art, and had gone on to study graphic design in college. Each new piece of information was like a precious gift to the twins, helping them connect with the mother they had lost too soon. For Margaret, it was a bittersweet journey. Joy at learning about the wonderful woman her daughter had become, mixed with deep regret for the years they had lost. The search took an unexpected turn when the investigator managed to track down Amelia's adoptive mother, Eleanor Johnson, who was still alive and living in a retirement community. After much deliberation and preparation, Margaret decided to reach out to her. The phone call was emotional for both women. Eleanor, now in her 80s, had been unaware of Amelia's passing and was devastated by the news. However, she was overjoyed to learn about Zoe and Zachary, the grandchildren she never knew she had. As Margaret listened to Eleanor share stories about Amelia's childhood, her first steps, her love for drawing, her kind heart, she felt a complex mix of gratitude and sadness. Grateful that her daughter had been raised with such love, and deeply sad for all the moments she had missed. This secondary plot not only provided healing for Margaret and the twins, but also opened up new relationships and connections. Eleanor became a part of their extended family, sharing photos, stories, and memories that helped fill in the gaps of Amelia's life. The journey to uncover Amelia's past became a way for Margaret to honor the daughter she had given up, and to ensure that Zoe and Zachary had a full understanding of their mother's life and legacy. It also served as a powerful reminder of the far-reaching consequences of past decisions and the healing power of truth and reconciliation. As this secondary plot developed, it added depth and complexity to the main story, intertwining themes of identity, family history, and the enduring bonds of love that can transcend time and circumstances. As the months passed, the relationship between Margaret and the twins evolved in ways that surprised and delighted all of them. The initial awkwardness and uncertainty gave way to a deep, genuine bond that grew stronger with each passing day. For Zoe, the relationship with her grandmother blossomed through shared interests. Margaret's love for gardening found an eager apprentice in Zoe, who took to the task with enthusiasm. Together, they would spend hours in the expansive gardens of the Thornton estate, Margaret passing on generations of knowledge about nurturing life from the earth. "You have a natural green thumb, my dear," Margaret would say, watching Zoe tenderly care for a newly planted rose bush. "Just like your great-grandmother." These quiet moments in the garden became a time for storytelling. Margaret would share tales of her own childhood, of the generations of Thorntons who had tended these grounds. Zoe, in turn, would talk about her mother, sharing memories that Margaret cherished like precious gems. Zachary's bond with Margaret developed differently, but no less profoundly. Initially more reserved than his sister, Zachary found common ground with his grandmother through books. Margaret's vast library, once a solitary refuge, became a shared sanctuary. They would spend rainy afternoons reading side by side, occasionally breaking the silence to share a particularly interesting passage or discuss a story's themes. It was during one of these reading sessions that Zachary first called Margaret Grandma without hesitation. The word hung in the air for a moment, both of them realizing its significance. Margaret had to blink back tears as she pulled him into a warm embrace. The twins also brought new life and perspectives into Margaret's world. They introduced her to their favorite music, taught her how to use social media, and shared their dreams for the future. Margaret found herself learning as much from them as they did from her. However, the path of their relationship wasn't always smooth. There were challenging moments that tested their growing bond. The first major hurdle came when Margaret overheard a phone conversation between Zoe and one of her old friends from before the move. "It's weird sometimes," Zoe was saying, unaware that Margaret was within earshot. "Grandma tries, but there's so much she doesn't get about being black in America. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in two different worlds." The words stunned Margaret deeply, but they also served as a wake-up call. Realizing the limits of her understanding, she took it upon herself to educate herself further. She began reading books by Black authors, watching documentaries about the African American experience, and even attending seminars on racial justice. One evening, she sat the twins down for a heartfelt conversation. "I want you to know," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that I'm trying to understand your experiences better. I know I'll make mistakes, and I'm going to need your help. But I promise you, I'll never stop trying to be the grandmother you deserve." This openness and willingness to learn endeared Margaret even more to the twins. They began to see her not just as their grandmother, but as an ally and advocate. Another significant moment in their relationship development came during a school open house. As Margaret walked through the halls with Zoe and Zachary, she overheard whispers and saw curious glances from other parents and students. For the first time, she felt a taste of the scrutiny her grandchildren faced every day. Without missing a beat, Margaret straightened her spine, took each twin by the hand, and walked proudly through the school. "These are my grandchildren," she announced to anyone who would listen, her voice ringing with pride. "Aren't they remarkable?" The twins, initially embarrassed, soon stood taller, drawing strength from Margaret's unwavering support. It was a turning point in their relationship, a moment when they truly became a united front against the world. They are Thorntons, and they have brought more joy, love, and meaning to this family name than you could ever understand. As security discreetly escorted a protesting Eugenia from the premises, Margaret rushed to find Zoe. She discovered both twins in the library, Zachary comforting his sister as she sobbed. Margaret knelt before them, taking their hands in hers. "I want you both to listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice firm but filled with love. "You are Thorntons, you belong here, and I am so proud, so incredibly proud to be your grandmother." She took a deep breath, tears shining in her own eyes. "What happened out there was ugly and wrong, but I promise you, as long as I'm alive, I will fight anyone who tries to make you feel less than the amazing, beautiful, brilliant children you are." Zoe looked up, her tear-streaked face a mix of vulnerability and hope. "You really mean that, Grandma?" "With all my heart," Margaret replied, pulling both children into a tight embrace. As they held each other, Margaret made a silent vow. She would use her position, her privilege, and every resource at her disposal to ensure that Zoe and Zachary would never again feel unwelcome in their own home. When they finally returned to the party, they walked out together, hand in hand, a united front. The remaining guests, having heard what transpired, greeted them with warm smiles and words of support. In that moment, as she stood proudly with her grandchildren, Margaret knew that they had faced a crucial test and emerged stronger. The road ahead might not be easy, but they would face it together, as a family. In the wake of the garden party incident, Margaret knew that simply banishing Eugenia and pretending the problem didn't exist wasn't enough. The conflict ran deeper than one woman's prejudiced remarks. It was a symptom of a larger issue within their community. Margaret was determined to address it head-on, not just for Zoe and Zachary's sake, but for the sake of progress and understanding in their small southern town. Her first step was to call a family meeting. Sitting down with the twins, Margaret opened up about her own past prejudices and the journey she had undergone since they came into her life. "I want you to understand," she told them, her voice heavy with emotion, "that people like Eugenia, people who think like I used to think, they're not evil. They're scared of change, of what they don't understand. But that doesn't excuse their behavior, and it doesn't mean we have to accept it." Zachary, always the more analytical of the twins, asked, "So what do we do, Grandma? How do we make them understand?" As time went on, their family unit grew stronger and more cohesive. They developed their own traditions. Sunday brunches, where they would take turns cooking dishes from both their cultural backgrounds. Movie nights, where they alternated between classic films Margaret loved and contemporary ones the twins enjoyed. And holiday celebrations that blended old Thornton customs with new ones that reflected their diverse family. Through it all, Margaret, Zoe, and Zachary were learning that family wasn't defined by blood alone, but by love, understanding, and a willingness to grow together. Their relationship was a testament to the power of open hearts and minds, proving that it's never too late to build bridges and create a loving family across generations and racial divides. The climactic event that would test the strength of Margaret's newfound family came on a warm Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after the twins had first arrived on her doorstep. The Thornton estate was hosting its annual garden party, a tradition that dated back generations. It was the first time Margaret had held the event since taking in Zoe and Zachary, and she was determined to make it a celebration of their new family. The grounds were immaculate, with flowers in full bloom and tables laden with an array of southern delicacies. Margaret had invited a diverse group of guests, including her new friends from the community center and the twins' schoolmates and their families. She hoped to bridge the gap between her old world and the new one she had embraced. As the party got underway, Margaret beamed with pride as she watched Zoe and Zachary mingle with the guests. They were poised and charming, every bit the Thorntons she knew they were. However, not everyone at the party shared her joy. Midway through the afternoon, Margaret overheard a heated conversation near the rose garden. Eugenia, her former bridge club president, was speaking in hushed but harsh tones to another guest. "It's a shame, really," Eugenia was saying, unaware that Margaret was within earshot. "The Thornton name used to mean something in this town. Now look at it, tarnished by those children. Margaret's lost her mind, pretending they're part of our world." Before Margaret could intervene, Zoe appeared around the corner. Having heard every word, the young girl's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes as she turned and ran towards the house. In that moment, Margaret felt a fury she had never experienced before. Without hesitation, she stepped into view, her voice ringing out clearly across the garden. "Eugenia," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave, now." A hush fell over the nearby guests as Eugenia sputtered in shock. "Margaret, surely you can't be serious. I was only saying what everyone's thinking." Margaret drew herself up to her full height, her eyes flashing. "If that's what you're thinking, then you don't belong here. Zoe and Zachary are my grandchildren." Margaret smiled, touched by his willingness to engage with the problem rather than shy away from it. "We educate them, sweetheart. We show them that their fears are unfounded. And we do it with grace and dignity, even when it's hard." With the twins' input and support, Margaret devised a plan. She decided to host a series of community dialogues at the Thornton estate, inviting people from all walks of life to come together and discuss issues of race, prejudice, and community. The first meeting was tense. Many of Margaret's old friends came, more out of curiosity than genuine interest in change. There were awkward silences and moments of heated disagreement. But there were also breakthrough moments of understanding, as people shared their experiences and listened to perspectives they had never considered before. Zoe and Zachary played a crucial role in these meetings. Their presence, their articulate expressions of their experiences, and their willingness to engage with even the most skeptical attendees began to soften hearts and open minds. As the weeks went by, the dialogue sessions grew larger and more diverse. Margaret reached out to local civil rights organizations, inviting speakers to provide historical context and facilitate discussions. She used her considerable influence to ensure that local leaders, from politicians to business owners, attended and participated. Not everyone was receptive to these efforts. Margaret received angry phone calls and letters from those who felt she was betraying her heritage. Some old friends stopped speaking to her entirely. But for every person who turned away, it seemed 2 more stepped up in support. One of the most significant moments came when Margaret decided to address her own family's history. With the help of a local historian, she researched the Thornton family's past involvement with slavery and segregation. In a powerful session, she publicly acknowledged this history, expressing deep remorse and committing to use her family's resources to promote equality and justice. This act of vulnerability and accountability had a profound impact on the community. It inspired other old families to confront their own histories, leading to a town-wide initiative to create a museum dedicated to telling the full, unvarnished history of their community. Throughout this process, Margaret's relationship with Zoe and Zachary deepened. They saw their grandmother not just as a loving caregiver, but as a powerful ally and advocate. The twins, in turn, blossomed under her unwavering support, growing more confident in their identity and their place in the community. However, the path to resolution was not without its setbacks. About 3 months into their initiative, the Thornton estate was vandalized. Racial slurs were spray-painted on the gates, and flyers denouncing Margaret as a race traitor were scattered across the property. The incident left everyone shaken, especially the twins. For the first time since coming to live with Margaret, they questioned whether they truly belonged. Margaret's response to this hate act became a turning point in their conflict resolution efforts. Instead of hiding the vandalism or quietly cleaning it up, she invited the entire town to help restore the property. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people showed up, armed with paint and cleaning supplies, ready to stand against hate. As they worked to erase the visible signs of prejudice, something remarkable happened. People who had never spoken before found themselves working side by side. Conversations started, connections were made, and a sense of community purpose began to emerge. By the end of the day, not only was the estate restored, but a new spirit of unity had begun to take hold in the town. The local newspaper covered the event extensively, with the headline reading, "Town Unites Against Hate, Chooses Love." In the aftermath of this event, Margaret's conflict resolution efforts gained new momentum. More people began attending the dialogue sessions, and there was a palpable shift in the town's atmosphere. While prejudice and misunderstanding hadn't disappeared overnight, there was a growing willingness to confront these issues openly and work towards change. As Margaret tucked the twins into bed that night, Zoe asked sleepily, "Grandma, do you think we're making a difference?" Margaret paused, considering her answer carefully. "Yes, sweetheart, I believe we are. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every conversation, every act of kindness, every stand we take against injustice, it all adds up. We're planting seeds of understanding that will grow long after we're gone." As she turned out the light, Margaret realized that their conflict resolution attempts had evolved into something much larger than she had initially envisioned. They weren't just resolving a personal conflict. They were participating in the ongoing work of healing long-standing societal wounds. While Margaret knew their efforts were far from over, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. The path ahead would undoubtedly have more challenges, but they had laid a foundation for real, lasting change in their community. The turning point came unexpectedly, about a year and a half after Zoe and Zachary had first arrived on Margaret's doorstep. A letter arrived from the state's Department of Education, inviting Margaret to speak at a conference on promoting diversity and inclusion in schools. As Margaret read the letter aloud to the twins over breakfast, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. "They want me to share our story," she explained, "to talk about how our family has changed and what we've been doing in the community." Zachary's eyes lit up. "That's amazing, Grandma. You can tell everyone about our dialogues and how people can learn to understand each other better." Zoe, however, looked thoughtful. "But Grandma," she said slowly, "is it really our story to tell? I mean, you've done a lot, but isn't this bigger than just us?" Margaret set the letter down, struck by the wisdom in Zoe's words. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. This isn't just our story. It's the story of our whole community, of everyone who's been part of this journey." That conversation marked a significant shift in their approach. Instead of simply accepting the speaking invitation, Margaret proposed something different. She reached out to the conference organizers with a new idea. A panel discussion featuring voices from across their community, young and old, black and white, those who had always championed diversity, and those who had undergone their own transformations. The organizers were intrigued by the concept, and soon Margaret found herself coordinating a diverse group of speakers from her town. This included Zoe and Zachary, who would share their perspective as children navigating a complex racial landscape. As they prepared for the conference, Margaret realized that this new direction aligned perfectly with everything they had been working towards. It wasn't about her as an individual, or even about their family alone. It was about showcasing the power of community, dialogue, and collective growth. This shift in focus energized their efforts back home as well. The community dialogues evolved into action committees, tackling issues like educational equity, police-community relations, and economic opportunities for marginalized groups. Margaret's role began to change too. Instead of always leading, she found herself stepping back more, facilitating and supporting others who were emerging as leaders in their own right. She watched with pride as Zoe and Zachary grew more confident in sharing their experiences and ideas. As the date of the conference approached, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just resolving a personal conflict or changing one small town. They were becoming part of a larger movement for understanding and equality, with the potential to impact lives far beyond their own community. As Margaret stood backstage at the education conference, waiting for the panel discussion to begin, she found herself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past 2 years. The woman she had been when Zoe and Zachary first knocked on her door seemed like a stranger now, a relic from a past life. She thought about how she had grown, not just in her understanding of race and privilege, but in her capacity for love, her willingness to challenge long-held beliefs, and her courage to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Margaret watched as Zoe and Zachary chatted animatedly with the other panelists, their confidence and poise a testament to their own growth. Gone were the shy, uncertain children who had arrived on her doorstep. In their place stood 2 self-assured young people, proud of their identity and eager to share their experiences. Zachary had developed a passion for social justice, devouring books on civil rights history and contemporary racial issues. His analytical mind allowed him to articulate complex ideas in ways that even adults found compelling. Margaret had no doubt that he would continue to be a powerful voice for change as he grew older. Zoe, with her artist's soul, had found ways to express her journey through her artwork. Her paintings, which explored themes of identity, family, and belonging, had gained attention beyond their small town. A local gallery had even hosted an exhibition of her work, titled Roots and Wings, A Biracial Child's Journey. As she observed her grandchildren, Margaret felt a profound sense of pride, tinged with a bittersweet awareness of how much she had missed with their mother, Amelia. Yet, she no longer dwelled in regret. Instead, she channeled those feelings into her commitment to be the best grandmother she could be, and to continue the work of making the world a little bit better for all children. Margaret's relationships within the community had evolved as well. Many of her old friends, who had initially distanced themselves, had come around, inspired by her transformation. Some had even become active participants in their initiatives for change. Those friendships that couldn't weather the storm of change had fallen away, replaced by deeper, more authentic connections with people from all walks of life. Her perspective on wealth and privilege had shifted dramatically. The Thornton estate, once a symbol of exclusivity and separation, had become a gathering place for the community, hosting everything from dialogue sessions to art classes for underprivileged youth. Margaret had also established a scholarship fund in Amelia's name, providing educational opportunities for minority students in their town. As the panel was about to begin, Margaret felt a gentle touch on her arm. She turned to see Miss Patrice, the social worker who had first brought Zoe and Zachary to her door. "I just wanted to say," Miss Patrice said softly, "that I'm so proud of you, Mrs. Thornton. When I first brought the twins to you, I hoped for the best, but prepared for the worst. You've exceeded every expectation. You haven't just changed your own life, you've started a ripple effect that's changing your entire community." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes as she squeezed Miss Patrice's hand in gratitude. As she stepped onto the stage to introduce the panel, she realized that this journey of growth and reflection was far from over. There would always be more to learn, more ways to grow, more work to be done. But as she looked out at the audience, saw the eager faces of people ready to listen and learn, and felt the presence of her grandchildren beside her, Margaret knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led her to a life richer and more fulfilling than she ever could have imagined. As the panel discussion came to a close, the auditorium filled with applause. Margaret, Zoe, and Zachary stood together, holding hands, their faces beaming with a mixture of pride and humility. The questions from the audience had been thought-provoking, the discussions deep and meaningful. It was clear that their story had resonated with many, sparking hope and inspiration for change. In her closing remarks, Margaret addressed the audience one last time. "When 2 little children knocked on my door 2 years ago, I thought my world was being shattered," she said, her voice strong and clear. In reality, it was being rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before. Our journey hasn't always been easy, but it has taught us that love knows no color, that family is what we make it, and that it's never too late to open our hearts and minds to new understanding. As they left the stage, Margaret felt a profound sense of completion, not of their journey, but of a significant chapter within it. The themes that had defined their story, redemption, the power of love to overcome prejudice, the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths, and the potential for growth at any age, had been reinforced not just for them, but for everyone who had listened to their story. Back in their hotel room that night, as Zoe and Zachary excitedly recounted their favorite moments from the day, Margaret watched them with a heart full of love. She knew that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more growth to experience, more love to give and receive. But she also knew, with a certainty that filled her with peace, that they would face it all together, as a family, as advocates for change, and as living proof that it's never too late to open one's door to unexpected blessings.